Good afternoon. Here we are at the Aspen Studios, and our guest today, very special guest, Matt the Shaman, tree communicator, is something that we've come up with. But Matt's an all-time, long-time Aspen, Colorado resident.
Yep.
Lives in a treehouse, zip lines to and from home, runs wilderness camps, works with trees, and has a philosophical view on life, which I think everyone should learn from. So without further ado, Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Nice to be here.
Very nice. Yeah, and we were talking yesterday, and it sounded like you just had a big job yesterday with an old cottonwood.
Yeah.
Which was a bit touch and go.
Yeah, it was a dangerous job. Dangerous, difficult, athletic. It was a good job. I'm relaxed today. I don't feel like I have to do anything.
There you go. And how long have you been working with trees?
Over 40 years.
Okay.
As a professional, getting paid to do it.
And I think we touched on it when we last spoke, but that book, is it The Inner Life of Trees?
The Secret Life of Trees.
Secret Life of Trees.
Or the secret. Let's see. They speak to each other through mostly the mycorrhiza fungi.
Right. The mycelial network.
The mycelia network. That's it. Yes.
And I mean, when you were reading that, were you at all surprised, or you were like, "This is something I kind of knew already"?
Yeah, it was a very familiar feeling, very familiar book. You know, there's another book called Secret Life of Plants, and there's been a lot of different upgrades of that book or different editions that have come out, and the more recent ones is where the guy discovered that plants and animals actually communicate on another level.
Right.
And we talked about that book, The Cosmic Serpents, DNA,
Yes.
and the Origins of Knowledge.
Yes.
So that's one of my favorite books that I really love that book a lot too, because
that's a great book. Yeah. I just kind of found that in the bookstore, perusing through it, and it's a guy doing a PhD on ayahuasca.
yes, well,
essentially, or ayahuasca kind of was the key to his thesis.
yes, well, and originally he was an anthropologist.
Right.
And what he was doing was documenting the tribes of South America before they got assimilated by Western culture.
Right.
And the shaman of the tribe that he was dealing with insisted that he actually have to do this ayahuasca trip before he left. So Jeremy's like, okay. Finally, he agreed. And the shaman said, "You're going to see two big snakes."
Right.
And he says that they're going to tell you something. They're going to communicate something to you about me. The shaman was like, and so he did the trip, and he saw these two giant electric snakes, and they said, "Oh, by the way, tell the shaman that he's just a human." and so he comes back to the shaman after he says, "Well, the snake said to tell you that you're just a human." So it was kind of an interesting, but he started researching it, and because he's a PhD anthropologist,
right,
and in his study he found that that psychotropics cause opening. They have keyways on the brain cells that are specifically for these substances. And they fit right in there, and then they open it up, and they shoot photons in there. And the photon excites the brain cells, and then they start shooting off photons. And so then he surmised from that everything's in communication with all the other living things all the time,
right,
on another level, and that it's a genetic communication.
Right, so there's this constant communication happening everywhere in the natural world with us.
Yes.
Or trying to communicate with us, at least sometimes.
Yes.
And
all the
then,
time, yes.
and to go back to the PhD anthropologist, the serpents are supposed to represent DNA, right?
Yes, the twin serpents.
Twin serpents.
And you'll see them throughout all of the shamanistic healing traditions, like even our own medical symbol.
Right.
Has the twin serpents.
Right, exactly. That's interesting.
Yes. So, yeah, and so what snakes in general are, I think, symbolic of a deeper communication, of genetic communication.
Are they? I thought they were symbolic of change.
And change, yes,
Okay.
yes, and change, but specifically, yeah, I mean, so the communication can bring on the change.
Right.
So
right.
first you realize you're like, oh, that's what's, and then it's like the change. But,
yeah, well, I guess they're the masters of change, right? Just
Yeah.
shedding the skin and then
Right.
having a new body. So
Exactly.
that's cool.
Yeah.
The issue with the natural world trying to communicate with us and us being oblivious to it is the distraction that we all live in.
Oh, it's so loud.
Very loud, right?
Yeah. Modern world is completely distracting and extremely loud.
And then to touch base with, I guess, the inner peace is to sit there quietly with yourself.
Yes.
And that's how you tap in to know that there's more dark matter than anything else.
So much more.
Okay.
So much more.
Yeah.
According to the physics,
Mm-hmm.
it's 95%.
Mm-hmm.
95.1.
95.1% dark matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's the same, it's mass and energy.
Mm-hmm.
So combined together. The mass, they're estimating it's 1% shy of 6 times the amount of mass that we know of in the universe.
Right.
It's just 1% shy of that,
Right.
of 6 times. So, and then the energy is many, many times more than the energy that we understand. But what they're discovering at CERN in Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
where they're smashing particles,
Yeah.
is that it actually doesn't contain mass. That it's not the Higgs boson. It's not a particle. It's actually an energy field. So they're renamed it. They're calling it the Higgs field now.
That's right. Well, yeah. So quantumly, it can't be a particle. It has to be a wave, or it has to be
It's all energy.
It's all energy.
It's all energy, and then what makes it turn into it's the way the particle reacts to the field.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the Higgs field, and then the way the particle reacts to it creates mass.
Right.
So then it doesn't actually contain mass itself. It's just energy condensed.
Right.
Which is kind of what I think a lot of people have kind of sensed that
Yeah.
idea.
And I mean, so you're tapping into the collective unconscious through yoga, meditation, or at least going elsewhere to then change the world that you live in, which is just 5%.
Right. So as the energy field projects through us,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes archetypes.
Right.
The archetypes of the collective unconscious, Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
So these things around us, the wood, steel, and stone, the color, all the colors, all the shapes, these are all archetypes. But there's also archetypes of human behavior,
Right.
like democracy.
Right.
Democracy is an archetype of our ancient ancestors.
Okay.
As we voted in our tribes
Mm-hmm.
Many thousands of years ago, possibly before we even had spoken language, we were voting.
Right. And those ripple effects of who we were back then obviously are echoes of who we are today, and
Right.
and it the drop of the stone in
It's a genetic memory.
a genetic memory, exactly, and that continues on
Right.
as life goes on.
Right. And when you try to repress or deny
Right.
these archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
they become, when the projection becomes pathological. So by repressing or denying the archetype of democracy, like when Hillary Clinton used superdelegates to push Bernie Sanders out of the primaries, it caused a pathology that we ended up with for 4 years, and that continues to kind of plague us at this point. But
There's a lot of different butterfly effect
Right.
causes, right?
right. But anytime you try to repress or deny any one of these major archetypes, because this is a major archetype, is democracy, and it's a cultural thing where
And how many archetypes are there? Like,
every symbol, like I said, every symbol, every color, and then there's stories.
right.
There's allegory and metaphor and parable, which is which is how we used to communicate for thousands of years.
Allegory, parable, and metaphor.
Yeah. So a lot of times, so our dreams are still based on
Programs.
that dialogue, on that type of language. So
And our dreams are more representative of who we are in real life compared to waking states, you think?
yeah, it taps into the other 95% of the mass and energy that's here.
Right.
So, and deja vu is one of those things where if you can remember the dream, you'll know what's going to happen before it happens.
Right.
From the memory of the dream, and you can change it if you need to. But I believe that probably already happened.
Right. So go give us an example, because I think this concept saved your life, right?
Yes, it's more than once. So,
Nice.
so you're standing there having deja vu, and you go, "Oh yeah, that's that dream," and you remember And for me, it happened all at once. It was like it all downloaded at once, and I realized that I was about to have an accident where I died. But I hit the brakes and I looked and I saw the rock that I actually crashed on in the dream.
Oh, wow.
And that rock came inside my helmet and smashed my skull and broke my skull open. And I know that I died in that dream. But that didn't happen because I was having, the minute I had deja vu, I hit the brakes and I was like, oh, and then I looked up ahead and I saw it and I was like, oh, there it is. And I wasn't sure if it was that rock or not, and I rode up and I looked at it and I was like, ooh, that's that rock. And I was
Wow,
like,
that you
oh,
recognize from
boy.
your dreams.
Yeah, so then I was like, what is that? And it just, for 10 more years, for a decade after that, I was still like, what the hell is that? Couldn't figure it out. Well, in the meantime, I'm doing a survey of my friends and everybody that I know. I'm like kind of a casual survey. And I'd never mentioned the word dream. I always mentioned deja vu, and I said, did you ever remember anything about it? And then a few friends of mine were like, well, yeah, I remembered it as a dream. And then there was a couple of friends of mine that actually had journals with the dates of the original dreams marked and the deja vu marked. And I was like, yeah. And
That's cool.
And I said, I couldn't quite figure it out. And it took me 10 years before I sat down with myself and put an X on the piece of paper and circled it. And I said, this is me having a dream. And the minute I started to put that other X where the deja vu occurred, I realized that at the moment of the dream, the time space had collapsed. And my body, my physical body, was in another place. While I was sleeping, having a dream, it was in another place, seeing it and feeling it and experiencing it, just as if I was there.
Right. So that's a very lucid dreaming state where you're elsewhere. Your body's dreaming here, but
It wasn't really lucid.
Okay.
Lucid, this was just, I was having a dream and I didn't pay that much attention to the dreams, except for that particular dream woke me up. So a lot of my big dreams wake me up. And so I pay real close attention to those. And this is there's different levels of dreaming. Some levels of dreaming, you'll be flying in your dreams, but it's because you're feeling held down in your waking life. So dreams can be compensatory in their relationship to your waking hours.
Right.
And
A balance.
Yeah. So there's different. So that's one level of dreaming. Lucid dreaming is another level of dreaming where your ego is involved, because you're actually aware inside the dream. So that's your ego being allowed to be part of the dream. And if you can, compartmentalize the ego, or, in the dream, you can ask for guidance at that point.
Right.
That's what's cool about lucid dreaming. You can ask for guidance.
Right.
And your dream will actually provide it with you. And you can bring up for Carl Jung, I think he had this entity called Philemon. Philemon. And Philemon was his dream guy, where he would go in there and he'd ask Philemon all these questions, And so he got a lot of guidance from Philemon.
Oh, nice. This is a made-up character for him. Or
Well,
made-up archetype
I don't know
for
if it's
him.
made up or it was an entity that he encountered in his dreams.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so that's what one of the things that was really amazing about Carl Jung, that when I discovered Carl Jung, I totally flipped out, because he was a man after my own heart in a lot of ways, even though he was a man of the 20th century, which has its masculine side, which sometimes doesn't address the feminine side
right,
as much as we do today.
Right.
We try to anyway.
Yeah. But he battled with Freud.
Oh yeah.
In the end.
Yes.
And it seems like Carl Jung's probably got more of a logical, archetypal analysis for human behavior compared to Freud, which has some of his personal own elements in it, right?
Freud was he kind of he didn't get it. Freud did not get it.
Right.
And he was so attached to his intellectual property.
Right.
Like the doctors who had done experiments with Deja vu. Mm-hmm. And they get attached to their intellectual property, that they don't want to let go of it, and it prevents the whole science from moving forward.
Right. And so there's an academic trend where they're saying deja vu is not connected to dreams, or
yeah, they're saying that the current theory
is psychosis.
That it's a misfiring of synapse between long-term and short-term memory.
Interesting.
And the experiment that they used was, they put electrodes on a guy's brain, and then they put him in a place they could prove that he'd never been before, and then they waited until he had a deja vu, and then they measured the response. And his brain had a long-term memory response. And they said, well, that's not possible in a place you'd never been before. And I'm saying, well, actually he was there. Mm-hmm. Physically.
Interesting.
And that he had seen that before, and that's why he had a long-term memory. But once you establish deja vu as a memory of a dream, it kind of throws a big wrench into physics. It opens a Pandora's box that most of them don't want to open.
Right.
Especially the applied physicists.
Right.
The theoretical physicists are kind of open to this, and there are some out there. One of them, I think her name is Lisa Randall. Mm-hmm. And she's particularly tuned into the idea of interdimensional realities within dark energy, dark matter.
Okay.
And that's kind of what the thesis ends in, is where we actually split off from that reality because we were using time outside of the harmony of nature, which creates a timeline that begins and ends, where that's not actually how it exists. It exists in a quantum fashion. And that's hard for us to wrap our brain around, because my brain actually doesn't really work that way. I can theorize about it.
We all work on a linear time fashion, right?
Exactly,
because that's the waking world in which we see. But then
we think we live and die on a timeline.
On a timeline, right? But then if we are just 5% of everything else, and we are actually different energy bodies walking around on this earth as well, then how does that play into the ego or the avatar that we have on this earth today?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. How does that play into it? Well,
and how do we incorporate more quantum time metrics compared to linear wise?
I guess it's what I try to do is to remove the projections. Mm-hmm. And so in order to remove the projections, you have to bring forward the repressed issues.
Right.
Everything repressed or denied gets projected.
So Freud was correct in that sense then?
Well, yeah. Freud was the father of analytical psychology.
Okay.
And analytical psychology can be rough on a person.
Okay.
But
then otherwise you go to Carl Jung and you're like, well, I'm going to fit into some of these archetypes here, and if I'm repressing some of these archetypes, they're going to come out in different fashions.
Yeah. So Freud did some of the analytical psychology is based a lot on the unconscious, but Freud believed that consciousness came from consciousness, whereas Jung realized that consciousness actually comes from an unconscious source.
Got it. Okay.
And that all this energy and mass around us also, we consider it unconscious, like the table. It's a piece of wood, you know, but it's actually a projection coming from us, and the wood is an ancient archetype from trees.
It's an ancient
trees,
archetype.
yes.
Okay, I see.
Like wood is like comes from an ancient archetype of trees, and so all these things around us you can pin on some kind of an archetype.
So, I mean, we talked about that book, The 5 Vedic Types. And,
yeah.
And I was speaking to like a Taoist energy
Yes,
guy.
yes.
And he was saying that a lot of the Carl Jung archetypes, I think, or he thinks, stem from the umbrella of the 5 Vedic types.
Yes.
Which can then be linked to just the 5 Vedic elements, right? Like earth, fire, water. So there's just the analogy keeps continuing.
It does. It does. It's super. That is the super cool analogy that I think all the shaman, all the holy men, all the shaman, all the sages, all meet in the same place.
Right.
And then everybody else is arguing about the semantics on the periphery.
Right.
So it's like, oh no, I'm right. No, my religion's correct. No, my religion. But yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But according to the texts, what happened was the reason we got separated was because the universe required a reflection from inside of itself, is what the texts said. And it was Marcus Garvey who came up with that. And it was about, it's kind of what the I and I of Rastafari is about. And what he was talking about was something similar to what Schrödinger, the physicist, was talking about when Schrödinger's cat. So either the cat, and I like to say that it's either sleeping or awake.
So the Schrödinger's cat, that was the cat that just kind of disappeared?
Well, it's in a box. It's in a box.
Okay.
And it's either sleeping or it's awake.
Right.
One of the two. And you won't know until you actually see it.
Okay.
And so until you actually see it, it actually only exists as a possible energy field, the Higgs field.
Right.
So it exists as a possible energy field until you actually see it. Then you know if it's awake or if it's sleeping. So, so the same with the universe. The universe required some type of separate free will perspective in order to solidify its existence, or it needed a reflection from inside of itself so that it could know itself. So our purpose here, it seems as though from that interpretation, is really not about us.
No.
Because the universe as an entity that is part of this, my body is actually part of this three-dimensional reality. So it actually belongs to this entity. It doesn't, I mean, I have free will over this much of this three-dimensional reality.
Right.
That's how much, so I have free will over it. And so it's in my body, beating my heart and running my parasympathetic nervous system while I am thinking that it's me, my ego. And it's seeing out of my eyes and reading my thoughts, trying to figure out what it is from my thoughts. And so my actual purpose here isn't really about me. It's not about me.
Right.
So
you're just the vessel.
I'm here and I'm learning and looking and trying to figure it out too, like everybody else is, and it's learning from me. But free will has a double-edged sword. It's also creation. It's not only a way to create a separate reflection, to create a reflection. I call it the epistemology of existentialism.
The epistemology of existentialism.
Yes. To be, kind of like, I don't like using that term a lot, but that's one of the terms that I use. And it's about how we know about things. And but it was originally for that purpose, free will. And I give the example of free will, human free will, that animals actually can't act outside of the harmony of nature.
Right.
Animals know the harmony of nature and they act within that unless a human teaches them to do different. We can train an animal to act outside but normally they would not act outside the harmony of nature. And there's no way that they would do that. and they cannot create destruction on a planetary level like humans can.
Right.
So that's my evidence of free will, and the free will as a psychological phenomena, it's listed as a psychological phenomena, points at the existence of another creature, another entity that's here, and that entity, according to those texts that the Da Vinci Code was written about. The Da Vinci Code was written about the Gnostic texts that were found in the caves at Nag Hammadi. They were taken to the Haile Selassie, King Selassie of Ethiopia, taken to his right-hand intellect, Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey was a savant linguistics man. He could speak any language, and even these ancient languages. He had a sixth sense to be able to decipher these ancient texts. And in the texts, that's what he deciphered, was that the universe needed required a reflection from inside of herself. And but unfortunately, free will is a double-edged sword. It comes with the ability to create and destroy. And so what happened? So we're basically taking free will to the edge of destruction to see if it's actually free or not. It's not necessary. A lot of that's unnecessary suffering.
And how does this tie in with the concept of the ego?
Well, ego is actually the conscious aspect of free will. Free will gives us the ability to notice, to make our own decision, a free will decision about what we're experiencing, and that's kind of where where the archetypes come into play. But it was originally just for that purpose, for that separate perspective. But we separated, we broke off because we were using time out, and ego allowed us to do this. Ego was the ability to take time and act outside of harmony with nature, and it created a timeline that begins and ends, but that's not actually how it exists.
Right. So,
and I believe that we're physically eternal. Our bodies are actually eternal too.
But then only to really understand even fragments of that, it's through sleep, through meditation.
Right now, now, but I believe Christ was actually tapping into it at a deeper level.
Sure.
Where he could be in another place in time and space.
Yeah.
And he could actually heal somebody before they were sick, injured, or dead.
Interesting.
And then they would wake up in the moment and they'd be like, "Oh, you were there. You prevented that from happening."
Right.
And everybody saw it as a miracle.
Yeah.
But there's actually a scientific basis for all of it.
I'm sure. There's a lot that we need to dig further into with different stories. We've got less than a minute left.
So.
And cool. Matt, thank you so much. It's really interesting, fascinating. And you work at Aspen Arborists.
Yeah, I sub out to Aspen Arborists.
Any tree issues, things that need moved? Or?
It was the only company, it's the only company in the valley, as far as I know, that uses only pure raw veggie oil for the bar and chain oil. So all the sawdust that comes out of those saws has nothing toxic in it. Your kids and pets can play in that sawdust. It doesn't hurt anything. It's edible.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's what we do. We try to keep it all extra safe.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for helping us and learning about these new topics that a lot of people struggle to wrap their heads around sometimes.
Right on.
Yeah.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers.